Hello, I'm Infamous Sphere. What's that? It's time for Infamous Queer!
Pride, 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 darling, darling, pride, pride 95!
Ah, communism. During the Cold War, the Eastern Bloc tried to maintain as much separation from the West as possible.
The resulting suppression of Western culture not only led to a vast network of underground culture smugglers, bringing bootleg tapes and books and records into the East, but it also led to a completely separate entertainment industry controlled by the state. In East Germany, this resulted in the creation of DEFA, East Germany's very own state-run film studios. I've reviewed a DEFA film already, the only gay East German film in existence, which screened on the night that the Berlin Wall fell.
But East Germany wasn't the only communist country, and it certainly wasn't the only one to make films. Let's talk about Hungary. After all, who's more qualified to explain Hungarian history and culture than somebody who's only a quarter Hungarian, has never been there, and has the Hungarian language skills of a preschooler?
Hungary went through a number of different periods of communist rule. The first involved being led by a dictator known rather charmingly as the Bald Murderer. So that was good news. In 1956 there was a revolution. This failed brutally, causing a vast exodus of Hungarian refugees fleeing from the spectre of yet more grinding communism. If you live in a city with a Hungarian diaspora, there's a good chance that many of them arrived after 1956. After the failed uprising, Nikita Khrushchev intervened and installed a new leader, János Kadar, or Kadar János if you follow Hungarian name order, to replace the Bald Murderer. Kadar was slightly more moderate than the aforementioned murderer and was even tortured under his regime. Over time, Kadar was able to effect reforms in Hungary, leading to an increased liberalisation, particularly when compared to the incredibly brutal Ceausescu dictatorship in adjoining Romania. Despite the fact that Hungary was still a grim communist country, it became considered somewhat of a gateway to the West, with more permeable borders than the rest of the Eastern Bloc. Literally, Hungary removed the fence along its border with non-communist Austria in May of 1989, causing many East Germans on holiday in Hungary to escape to Austria and travel to the West. A picnic was even arranged between Austria and Hungary, and the Hungarian government and police stood by in calculated idleness while 600 East Germans escaped. The dicey nature of Hungary's borders continues to this very day, but that's another story.
Hungary, like East Germany, had its own state-run film industry, the Hungarian National Film Company. However, after Kadar took control of the country, other studios were founded and young directors were given the chance to direct their own films. But were any of these films gay? Yes! Today we're going to be watching a Hungarian communist lesbian movie. Why? Because it's a Hungarian communist lesbian movie. This is Another Way. Ah yes, Another Way. This 1982 film was directed by Karoli Mak, a director who started his career in 1954 and is still alive today. Another Way is based on a novel by Hungarian lesbian author Erzsébet Galgocsny and may well be the only Hungarian communist lesbian movie in existence. If that's not a claim to fame, I don't know what is. This is not an easy movie to get hold of. I was only able to find it without included subtitles, and as my Hungarian is still very basic, I needed to get some. When I did, they were out of sync with the dialogue, meaning that they would appear about 30 seconds before the lines were actually spoken, usually during the establishing shot before any of the characters were on screen. Here, let me simulate my experience of watching this film for you all. List?
To taxi bus?
On the one hand, this made watching Another Way into an interesting artistic experience, like divining meaning from a looping video installation halfway through the loop. On the other hand, this was incredibly annoying. Thankfully, you won't have to have this experience. Using the magic of video editing, I'll be manually entering the subtitles exactly where they need to go, meaning that even if the only word you know of Hungarian is paprika, you'll still have a far better understanding of what's going on than I did. Let's begin.
1958. We start in medias res with some totally scorching sax music as a woman is gunned down at Hungary's border. This is Eva, and she is now very dead. Well, that's cheery. Cut to Livia, a woman in a neck brace, being given a sponge bath, in a scene that continues the tradition of uncomfortable hospital sequences in communist gay cinema. Still, at least it's not gastric lavage.
Furcsa. Ő akart engem megölni. Mégis ő halt meg. Én megélek. Mi lesz velünk, Éva?
We're then transported back in time through the power of jazz to the scene where these two meet. Eva is adrift, having been unemployed since leaving the Communist Party. She applies for a job at a newspaper. Eva gets the job and is given a space in Livia's office. There's a frisson between them, and it isn't long before Eva makes a move, in one of the most forward ways possible.
Miért vetted el a bugyimat?
Well now.
After this exchange, Eva returns home to find her ex-girlfriend, who's literally just returned from a prison camp.
Mikor szabadultál?
1 hónapja.
Nagyon rohadt volt.
Sokat fáztam. Volt egy szadista smasszernőnk. A leghidegebb télben is mindig hálóingre kellett vetkőzni.
És most pénzre van szükséged?
Nem.
She's also being pressed into service as an informant by the secret police, partially because of her sexuality.
Ígérnek fűt, fát.
Például mit?
Lakást, állást a szakmámban, meg zsarolnak. Nem csak a politikai múltammal, hanem hogy... azzal is, hogy nőket szeretek.
Naturally, Eva treats her old flame with compassion and invites her to... No, wait, no she doesn't.
Hogy mit talán újra...
Jaj, hagyjál! Te nem kell lesz nekem, Magda, értsd meg, nem! Nem szeretlek.
You just got out of a gulag? Well, fuck you!
If we're being charitable, this could be Eva's sense of self-preservation kicking in. If her ex is labelled as a subversive, it might be dangerous to be seen with her. But this is Eva we're talking about, a woman who decided to hit on another woman by stealing her underwear, like this is a 1980s boob comedy.
Eva doesn't seem to give a shit about being discreet. She's just an asshole.
The sudden arrival of Magda doesn't seem to have an impact on Eva's main goal, though, which is, of course, getting into Livia's pants. Or maybe her lack of pants, seeing as Eva probably stole those too.
There were no laws against female homosexuality in 1958, and male homosexuality was decriminalised in 1961, but historically, Hungary is not the most progressive of countries. It could be worse, but communist Hungary wasn't exactly a pride parade, meaning that one wonders why Eva feels so confident in being so obvious.
And progressive society or not, touching your partner up under the table is generally frowned upon, and it looks like Eva's dangerously close to doing just that. Anyway, the bar staff have definitely noticed and make all manner of pithy knowing remarks, but they don't get the full show because Eva and Livia decide to take it outside, only to be unceremoniously interrupted by the police.
Kérem a személyi igazolványokat. Maga férjes asszony, miért keveredik ilyesmibe? Ha még egyszer rajta kapjuk, hogy ilyesmit csinál, meg fogjuk mondani a férjének. Megértette? És a felettesének. Menjen haza.
After this scare, Livia gets cold feet and tries to avoid Eva.
Livia?
Hello?
Sadly, while Livia might be warding off Eva's attentions, she's not really enjoying her husband's company either. Her level of disgust at the mere thought of having sex with him is palpable.
Sokszor arra gondolok, hogy a szolgálat miatt túl sokat vagy egyedül.
Én nem tudom, mi van velem. Mostanában folyton aludnék. Na, megyünk.
Eva tries to occupy herself by going back to the same restaurant she and Livia were in before, because apparently there's only one restaurant in Hungary. While there, she flirts with the butch waitress, who gives her a secret message on a cigarette.
Really? That was all the secret message was? Surely she could have just said that out loud.
It's not as if anyone in this whole restaurant seems to care about the presence of lesbians. However, we've forgotten about Eva and Livia's work. The two go on a trip to the country along with a colleague in order to evaluate the success of a farming collective.
There's rather a lot of political discussion, which was incredibly hard for me to understand, because the subtitles appeared several shots before the people actually spoke. So if I completely misunderstood what's happening in this part of the film, that's why.
Eva writes up her story on the gathering at the collective, but is told that it can't be published.
Meddig játsszuk még azt, hogy ami kellemetlen, az gyorsan bevágjuk a fiókba, vagy besöpörjük a szőnyeg alá?
Nem érti, hogy a most és az itt kimondható igazságoknak valahol határa van az Istenik magának.
Engedje meg, hogy most visszakérdezzem. Valóban nem érzi, hogy a leírt és kimondott hazugságnak is van valahol határa? Annak vajon hol van a határa?
She decides that it isn't worth compromising and quits.
Hová megy?
Sétálni a Margit szigetre. Vagy a 3 huszárba. Haza az édes jó anyukámhoz. Moszkvába, New Yorkba, a Holdra! Semmi köze hozzá!
Well, at least she's a bit more direct about quitting her job than Philip was about quitting his. It seems that the democratic power used in electing the leaders of the collectives doesn't extend to every other system in the rest of the country. The head of the newspaper is enraged about Eva's story, but since Eva's already fucked off to the countryside to make bread, who cares? Hooray!
Oh, but the story isn't over yet. Wasn't this a lesbian film? Why, yes, it was!
Eva writes Livia some scathing letters. Strangely, this seduction technique is even more enticing than Eva stealing Livia's underwear, as it causes Livia to go and visit Eva in the country, accompanied by a burst of raging sax. Meanwhile, Livia's deeply unappealing husband is beginning to suspect that his wife is having an affair. Cue him attempting to rape Livia, changing his mind, and shooting her in the bath instead. After all this, Livia decides it isn't worth continuing to see Eva. The police question Eva about the motives for the shooting, and ask her a whole bunch of incredibly invasive questions.
Hát, hogy csinálják egymással azt a valamit?
Az ujjunkkal csináljuk. Azt dugjuk bele oda. Lehet 1 ujjal, lehet 2-vel, vagy 3 ujjal. Kurva anyádat.
Ah, yes, the old straight man asking questions about the sex life of a woman he's just met because he's just curious. Well, we've all been there. Literally. This is the only thing in the film I can say that I've actually experienced.
I've never stolen anyone's underwear, received a secret message wrapped around a cigarette, or wielded a giant pair of Struwwelpeter scissors dangerously close to my delicate face meats, but I have been asked really inappropriately intrusive questions by straight people.
Thanks, Karoly for this hearty dose of painful realism, and a reminder that whether you're in communist Hungary or in the modern-day West, some people are always going to be terrible. Hooray!
After losing her job, her girlfriend and her privacy, Eva rightly decides to get out and goes to cross the border. I can only hope she's crossing the border in the right place, because if she ends up in Romania, she'll be even worse off. Unfortunately, even the horrors of Romania are out of Eva's reach, as she's unceremoniously shot dead by border guards, in a scene that we saw at the beginning of the movie, because Karoly really wanted to drive home the point that Hope is dead. Cue sax.
Well, that was a piece of cinema.
I've only seen one communist film before, the day of a film coming out, but watching Another Way, I was struck by several stylistic similarities. The uncomfortable, lengthy hospital sequences indicate a trend towards uncompromising documentary-style realism in communist cinema. Both hospital sequences highlight how alone the characters are, with only nurses to help them through their turmoil. They hate themselves and they're in pain, and watching them is painful. More surprising is the unusual score of both films. Coming Out featured a spare, classical score that was very heavy on the clarinet, with the occasional interjection of popular music.
Another Way favours saxophone. And oh boy, is there saxophone in this movie.
The score is incredibly strange, smouldering jazz. Not the stereotypical Kenny G cheese saxophone one would typically associate with the 80s, but a style disconnected from the West.
I can only theorise that the unusual musical choices of both films have to do with two factors. One is the cultural distance from the West. There was some degree of cultural exchange, but both scores seem distinctly out of their time. Anything quite like Another Way score before. It's not 50s jazz. It's not 80s sax. It's not even saxophone. It's just its own bizarre Hungarian thing.
The other theory is that both directors were working with limited resources, without the locations, fashions, glamour and budget that most Western directors had access to. There weren't as many ways for them to add life and interest to their movies, and so they chose to do so with the score.
I'd love to have a definitive reasoning or explanation about the musical choices in communist cinema, but I haven't really been able to find that much in English, either about Another Way specifically or about communist film scores in general. So it will have to remain a sexy mystery.
With that said, the film score is a score, not a reflection of popular music at the time.
Let's take a minute to appreciate just what was climbing up the charts in early 80s communist Hungary.
Ég s víz között a vezérhajó útra kész. Vigyél el minket arra, hol még senki se jár. Nem fértek el, van már elég tengerész.
Incredible!
Santa Maria!
No, that wasn't a parody. That was unparodiable. Any parody of that would have been indistinguishable from the real thing.
Speaking of strange sound, there's another odd detail to consider. This is a Hungarian film, but it doesn't star Hungarians. Both of the leads in this film are Polish and were dubbed by Hungarian voice actors.
Was it easy to get Polish actors? Were they bigger stars, thus giving this more of an export appeal for the rest of the Eastern Bloc? Was a Polish language release planned? How does the dubbing affect the performances? These are not questions I can answer.
Another Way is not an easy film to watch. It's bleak, brown, and everyone's wearing beige. At a first glance, this movie is disturbingly similar to the worst professional movie I've ever seen, the 1980 film Windows, a film so bad it was almost blacklisted.
However, Another Way is superior to Windows in many ways.
For one thing, it's significantly less homophobic. Eva is a little forward and strange, but she's not shown to be evil, and the threat of sexual assault, while present, isn't in any way linked to any of the film's queer characters. There are no male saviours here. All of the antagonists are gross, entitled straight men. The early 80s was not a particularly good time for queer cinema, even in the West, so the fact that Another Way depicts a queer female couple who actually have sex and don't have their lives or relationships defined by men is notable in and of itself, even if it ends very badly for both of them.
The bad ending seems like far more of a comment on the oppressive nature of 1950s Hungarian society than it does a gross offensive scenario imagined by somebody exploiting queer people for shock value. So that's something.
Coming Out is definitely the more appropriate comparison, but even though the two films have many similarities, Another Way is significantly more critical of communism than Coming Out was. There's no shine of propaganda, no little speech indicating that life is significantly better under the current regime than it was previously. This version of Hungary is hypocritical, and life is grueling and unpleasant. Even those who desire change are powerless to affect it, and there is no escape. And this movie was made under communism. Granted, it's a period piece, so maybe it was possible to be critical of an earlier leader, with the implication that the current political system is superior. Or maybe there was just significantly less censorship in the Hungarian film industry than there was in East Germany. I genuinely don't know.
One thing this makes clear to me is the gaps in my knowledge. I don't know how Karoli Mak was able to direct this. I don't know why the leads are Polish. I don't know if it's an accurate representation of the content of the novel, and I don't know how well it was received. Let's just add it to the growing list of Hungarian mysteries, along with where did the Hungarians come from? Why is their language so completely unrelated to the rest of the languages in Europe? And how is it that the whole phrase, I am washing the dishes, can be condensed into one single word? But mysteries aside, should you watch it?
You probably won't be able to. This isn't an easy film to find, or to find out about, at least in English language media. The unsynchronized subtitles made this a struggle to watch, so unless you're going to a screening with professional subs, and possibly a lecture explaining the significance and the history behind the film, or if you're fluent in Hungarian, I probably wouldn't recommend it.
So that was Another Way. And now, if you'll excuse me, I've got to go. If I'm ever going to understand this film, I've got a lot more Hungarian practice to do.
Kik laknak azok fölött az üzletek fölött?
Fuck!
They went home by another way. Yes, they went home by another way. Home by another way. Maybe me and you can be wise guys too. Go home by another way. We can make it